Hi, Year 10s. We're on lesson 3 today, which will be on the presentation of Marley. Me and Miss Harrison know that both our classes have covered Marley quite recently, and we would like to use this session to go over quotes that maybe going from the usual that you would choose, such as I wear the chains I forged in life, mankind is my business. We did go through those in lessons, so make sure you use your notes, and we're just going to get started with the first quote. Before we get started, the quote will just catch you up where you're at. So, Scrooge has now left the counting house. We as readers have learnt how unlikable he is. He's refused to help the poor. He's turned away the charity workers. He's turned away Fred. He's reluctantly given Bob Cratchit, his clerk, a day off. So he's not a particularly nice man. He's a very solitary man. And we learn more about his lonely existence following him finishing up at the counting house, and he's at his house. When he arrives home, he is greeted by the ghost of Marley, who was Scrooge's business partner, and he's been sent there with a few messages. One of them warning about the dangers of living a life of selfishness. So I was thinking about that theme of selfishness, and I picked this quote because I think there are some allusions to what Dickens thinks about acting more kindly towards others. So my first quote is, Scrooge had often heard it said that Marley had no bowels, but he had never believed it until now. And I never really understood what he meant by that until I researched a little bit more, and I thought I'd like to share with you what I found out about it. So this sort of will be handy for you guys to know that the Victorians were very religious people, and so Christianity was a massive, prominent part of their culture. And so when I talk about this quote, knowing that will be helpful. So the first thing that you need to know is that bowels is actually a metaphor, and it's a religious allusion. So remember, allusion means a cultural reference from a story or from a film that another writer will use and embed in their text. So they've used this religious allusion. And there is this, I guess, is it how you pronounce it? Colothians? Yeah. Colothians, who said this and put on therefore as the elect of God, holy and beloved, bowels of mercy, kindness, humbleness, of mind, meekness, and long-suffering. And basically, what that's saying is that you should actually be a compassionate and kind person, and this is sort of the way that you live a godly and holy life. And so, basically, when we look at the metaphor of bowels, it means the bowels of compassion. So if Marley doesn't have any, it means that he never chose to show any compassion and kindness towards others. He has closed off this ability to be nice to other people, and this leads us to the idea of purgatory. So purgatory is the place where, when you die, you usually think you're going to go to heaven or hell. And there's a Catholic belief that in purgatory, you basically have some unfinished business, don't you? And that you need, that sinners that have got unfinished business need to be made clean. So Marley, unfortunately, led a life of greed, which could be arguably a sin, and therefore he is stuck in purgatory. And so add to that, I think the metaphor here shows you that that reference that Dickens makes shows you a allusion to Dickens' message, which is that you need to be kind to others, otherwise you may live a life of purgatory, which would be a real sort of fear to the Victorian audience. And another thing I found, besides a religious allusion, is that the bowels, there was often a belief in ancient and medieval medicine that organs of bodies were believed to secrete affections, like feelings. So there was this idea that bowels were responsible for secreting kindness. So there's two ways that you can interpret that particular body part, or that metaphor, should I say. And I would say, and bet my money on it, that because Dickens was part of a very religious society, that it was this reminder from reminder from the Bible that we need to be kinder, and the fact that he doesn't have any shows you that he did not. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
The only thing that, drawing on my GCSE RE knowledge, is in purgatory, the way that you get out of it is you went to purgatory if you had sinned before death and hadn't been able to confess to those sins. So the only way that you were going to get out of that is if friends or family prayed for you and were able to get you out of purgatory. So obviously, because Marley is selfish and doesn't have anyone apart from Scrooge who wouldn't pray for him anyway, because while he's fond of him, I don't think they have a true friendship really. That is why he's constantly living his life in purgatory, because he has no connection with anyone. So,
that's a really good point. I never knew that.
Yeah,
it's really good. And so I think that is that idea that if you have a Catholic audience saw that, I think that would sort of be very much food for thought about how, and reflect on their actions about
and
how.
It's highlighting the importance of emotional connections, which is potentially or arguably why Scrooge makes that connection back with Fred at the end of the novella, potentially.
Well, as a fear that someone won't pray for him when he dies.
Yeah.
Good point. I like that. Thanks, Miss Harrison. Thanks. So we're going to move on to Miss Harrison's quote.
Okay, so following on from Miss Wan's then, this is another kind of religious reference. So Marley is talking about his regret. This is after Scrooge talks about him being a good man of business, and he goes on his huge rant about mankind was my business. And he says, why did I walk through the crowds of fellow beings with my eyes turned down and never raised them to that blessed star which led the wise men to a poor abode? Now, obviously, we've got the religious reference there to the to Jesus's birth story, and I think Marley here is being quite self-deprecating, and he's saying that he wasn't wise in life and he didn't make wise choices. Because he's not counting himself in that idea that he's a wise man. And again, obviously, there's the reference to the poor abode, which was obviously Jesus and his birthplace in Bethlehem. So this last line, which led the wise men to a poor abode, there was huge, like Ms. Wan said already, about the religious, the deeply religious society the Victorians were living in. Dickens had a huge issue with the institution of religion and how it kind of wasn't all what it said it was. He didn't have issues with the spirituality aspect of it, like in a belief in God, but he didn't believe that the church was doing enough to help those who were less fortunate. And there's a reference to that in Stave 3 when the Ghost of Christmas Present says these so-called men of the cloth. And a man of the cloth is essentially a religious man or someone who works for the church, who supposedly are doing good but aren't really. And he believed that religious institutions such as the church should be doing more to help those who are less fortunate. So obviously there's the reference to the poor in particular who are in need of wise men's help. But also we've got this reference to a star, this blessed star, which again, this arguably could be a reference to light and how Marley kind of lived his life in the dark as has Scrooge, and therefore they aren't kind of enlightened to the suffering of the poor, and aren't enlightened into how they can help those that are less fortunate. And the fact that he's using like a rhetorical question here, I think as well is important, and the fact that his eyes are turned down. So again, we've got this kind of metaphor or allusion to blindness, which we talked about in the first lesson. So again, his eyes are turned down. He's choosing not to see those who are less fortunate. And this is arguably why he's living his life in purgatory now. But I think the reference, most importantly, to the wise men is quite important. Like I said, I think he's being quite self-deprecating, which is essentially kind of talking badly about himself, because he recognises the poor choices that he's made in life and how that is causing him to now suffer in death. And this is why Marley is used as a tool from Dickens to help Scrooge to change, and not just Scrooge, but on a wider scale, Victorian society and Victorian rich upper class to change, so that they aren't tortured in death, which is, arguably now you wouldn't see that as a real fear, but as Ms. Wan's already said, in Victorian times when, religion was a huge deal for them, they really would have been scared of living a life not in heaven, or some people argue that purgatory is worse than hell, because it's like this limbo where you don't kind of fit into anywhere.
Your spirit's not rested.
Your spirit's not rested. And that links to what Marley said earlier on, where it says no rest, no peace, incessant torture of remorse. Is there anything that you can add to that?
I really liked the fact that we accidentally both chose quotes that are religious allusions, and I think it's good for you guys to think about the religious nature of the audience. And whilst Miss was talking, I thought it might be worthwhile for you guys to sort of know that we would call Marley a foil to Scrooge, so that character was there to highlight qualities in Scrooge. And I think the quote that Miss Harrison picked was quite good, because it said, "Why did I walk through the crowds of fellow beings, my eyes turned down?" So if you remember in the opening of Stave 1, Scrooge did the very same thing. There's this line, "When will he come to see me? No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle, no children asked him what it was o'clock, no man or woman." So people avoid him, but he actually does walk through these crowds of people ignorantly, as with his eyes turned down, as Marley does here. And I think, we could say Marley is the sort of warning to the audience that this is what could happen to Scrooge, and therefore the horrifying consequence of purgatory would make them really care about Scrooge's transformation, I think, and actually that it is necessary for his, spirit and the afterlife, and so I think, Scrooge is following a very similar, almost parallel path, if not worse. It's too late for Marley, though.
Yeah.
And so that's why he's coming back, perhaps, to try and... did we talk about this idea of repentance? Did I talk about it with you? Maybe not. No. But this idea of maybe to put things right for... Oh, no, it was in my Year 9 class. Put things right,
Well, he refers to, when he talks about the chain, he says, yours was as long and as ponderous as this seven Christmas Eves ago. So, he's saying, well, my situation's bad. It's probably going to be worse for you if you don't change your ways.
And there's this image at the end of Stave 1, isn't there? I think, where Marley's ghost leaves him, and it says, "The air was filled with phantoms, wandering hither and thither in restless haste, and moaning as they went. Every one of them wore chains like Marley's ghost." And I think this links quite well to what Miss Harrison said. It's not just asking Scrooge. Scrooge is a fictional character, but he is a construct of the Victorian class. And so if every one of them is wearing chains like Marley's ghost, you could maybe think that represents maybe Victorian class.
Society, yeah.
And the chains are symbolic of the sin of greed, I guess, and none were free. So they were all in purgatory.
And they're all suffering in death.
So I haven't really got anything else more to say in terms of our religious chat today. What themes do you think that would be good to talk about Marley?
Themes. I suppose redemption, you could link it to Scrooge's redemption, because his warning is the thing that kind of sets off Scrooge's transformation, I suppose. It's through the intervention of the ghost that Scrooge is able to change.
So perhaps supernatural as well.
Yeah.
Regret.
Yeah. Guilt.
Guilt, yes. Maybe if you actually got a question on sin as well, you could talk about the chains being symbolic of that. So yeah, I hope that's sort of useful. We will post this with your worksheet. Please complete it. Remember, in January, you will get an assessment on Scrooge, but it will help you trying to make those connections across other areas of the text as well, not just the opening of the text. Okay, thank you, bye.